The snow comes down sideways in a valley the state highway map forgot 50 years ago. A single dirt road threads through bare hardwood. No streetlights, no houses, only the dark scar of an old rail bed running parallel to the trees where steel rails used to lie. The road ends at a clearing, and in the clearing a wooden building, single story, peaked roof, a bay window staring at nothing. Above the window, paint cracked and ghosted 6 faded letters, pen RR. 67 winters have come and gone through this place. 67 Februaries. 67 empty platforms. A girl is walking toward it, 20 years old. A duffel bag too light for a life. A wool coat too big for her shoulders. A pocket watch ticking against her collarbone in a rhythm older than she is. She does not know what is under the floor. She does not know who has been waiting. She does not know that somewhere in a leather-bound book, kept on a basement shelf for 54 years, a dying woman has already written down her face. The wind moves once, the watch ticks, and the door, this patient door, this door that has not been opened since 1958, begins to turn. The snow came down sideways that February night. Not the soft kind, the mean kind. The kind that finds the gap between your collar and your skin and stays there. Maeve Donnelly stood in front of the abandoned train depot at the end of a road that the state of Pennsylvania had stopped putting on its highway map in 1972. She was 20 years old. She was carrying a canvas duffel bag that weighed less than it should have, and inside the inside pocket of her grandfather's old pea coat, folded twice, was a $10 bill. That was everything she had. The depot in front of her was dark. The roof over the freight room was half gone. The windows had been boarded for 40 years. The county said the building was scheduled for demolition in the spring, but Maeve didn't know any of that yet. What she did know, what she could feel against her collarbone, ticking in the cold like a second heartbeat, was the silver pocket watch on a worn leather cord that her grandfather had carried in the breast pocket of his denim work shirt every day of his working life. She reached up. She held it through the wool of her coat. She closed her eyes, and the voice in her head was not her own. It was her grandfather's. Donnelly girl, when you need to know where you belong, open the back. She thought of his voice, and his hands, and the smell of diesel that used to come home in her father's hair. And she thought, I'm going to open this door now, because I have nowhere else to go. But before we get to the door, let me tell you how she got there. Because nothing about this story makes sense unless you understand the watch. The Donnellys had worked the Pennsylvania railroads for as long as the railroads had been there to work. Cormac Donnelly, Maeve's grandfather, had been a brakeman on the Pennsylvania Railroad's Pocono Division from 1949 until the line went bankrupt in 1976. Then for Conrail, until he retired in 1981. That's 32 years of cabooses, 32 years of frostbitten hands, 32 winters in the cuts north of Pittston where the wind comes down off the ridges and finds you no matter how many layers you wear. Cormac had grown up the youngest of 7 children in a coal patch house in Lackawanna County. His father had died of black lung when Cormac was 15, so Cormac had quit school, walked down to the section gang office, and taken the first job they'd give him. He didn't complain about that, not once, not in 76 years. He had a watch, a Hamilton 992B in a flat silver hunting case, on a worn leather cord, and he carried that watch in his breast pocket every working day of his life. Set to railroad time, accurate to within 10 seconds a year, he'd say. A railroad man always knows what time it is. He'd say it the way other men said grace before a meal, like it was a small kind of prayer. Maeve's father, Finian Donnelly, grew up listening to Cormac's stories at the kitchen table in the small Scranton row house where the family lived. Finian was supposed to do something different. That was the plan. The whole plan. Finian was going to wear a tie. Finian was going to work in an office. Finian was going to make the kind of money that didn't come home with grease under the fingernails. For 2 years after high school, Finian did exactly that. He worked at an insurance company in downtown Scranton. He wore the tie. He carried a leather briefcase that his mother had bought him for his graduation. And then, on a Monday morning in 1998, Finian Donnelly walked into the office, set his nameplate on his desk, walked back out, and by lunchtime he was filling out an application for the Conrail track maintenance crew. He told Cormac that night. At the kitchen table, he said. The office felt like wearing somebody else's coat. Cormac didn't say anything for a long minute. He just looked at his son. Then he reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the Hamilton watch on the leather cord, and he slid it across the table. He said, "A railroad man should always know what time it is." That's how Finian got the watch. Finian married Roisin Burke in the spring of 2004. Roisin was a small, dark-haired woman who worked at the front desk of a dentist's office in Scranton. She had a quiet laugh and a way of touching the back of Finian's neck when she walked past him in the kitchen, like she was checking, just to make sure he was still real. Maeve was born late that same year. She had her father's nose, her mother's hair, and the kind of stubborn eyes that her grandfather Cormac said came straight down from his own mother, who had crossed the Atlantic at 19 with $2 sewn into the hem of her dress. Stubborn was a Donnelly word. It meant, we don't bend. It meant, we keep going. It meant, when the weather turns, we turn into it. For the first 12 years of Maeve's life, her father came home every evening, with grease on his hands and the sweet diesel smell of the rail yards in his hair. He taught her how the switches worked. He taught her the names of the freight cars, boxcars, gondolas, hoppers, tank cars, reefers. He taught her how to read a schedule. He taught her this. He sat her on the kitchen counter one night when she was 6, and he said, "Maeve, a railroad is the most honest kind of work there is. Because steel does not lie, and gravity does not lie, and a train will arrive at a place at a particular time or it will not, and there is nothing else to discuss." She was 6. She didn't understand the half of it, but she'd remember it, word for word, every word, for the rest of her life. Finian died in March, the year Maeve was 12. It was a Tuesday. It was cold. It was the kind of cold that locks the iron tie plates against the rails so hard that one of them, in a cut north of Pittston, cracked. The Conrail incident report said the cause was a broken rail in a frozen tie plate. The freight derailed. 12 cars, then 14. Finian was on the ground crew responding to the first derailment when a second car shifted off the rails above him. He didn't suffer. That's what they told Roisin. Roisin was 33 years old. She had a daughter who was 12 and a husband who wasn't coming home. She nodded. She thanked the man from Conrail. She closed the front door, and then she sat down on the floor of the hallway, right there, with her back against the door. And she did not get up for 2 hours. Maeve found her there. Maeve was 12 years old, and she did not know what to do. So she sat down beside her mother, on the cold hallway floor, and she took her mother's hand, and she held it, and she did not cry. Because Donnellys did not cry. Cormac had told her so. He'd said, "Crying is private weather, girl. You wait until the storm passes. Then you put the kettle on." She did not put the kettle on that day, but she did not cry either. Cormac outlived his son by 14 months. He went on a Sunday morning, in his armchair, in the same small Scranton row house where Finian had grown up. The Hamilton pocket watch was open on the little side table beside him, still ticking, still set to railroad time. Maeve was 13. She was the only family left to inherit the watch. She sat in his chair after the funeral, She held the watch in both hands like it was a living thing, like it might fly away if she didn't hold it gently. And then she did something she had not planned to do. She turned it over. She found the small notch on the back of the hunting case, the notch you press with your thumbnail, and the back cover opened, and inside, engraved in letters so small she had to hold it up to the lamp to read them, were these SWSBJ 1953? She did not know what they meant. She turned the watch over and over in her hands. She traced the engraving with her fingernail. SW, somebody's initials, SBJ, a place maybe, 1953, the year her grandfather was 24. She thought, he didn't tell me everything. She thought, there was something he didn't tell me. And then she closed the back cover, and she put the watch on the leather cord around her neck, and she wore it. From that day forward, every day, through high school, through every shift at the diner she would later work, through the night she would walk 11 blocks in the snow, through every cold thing that was coming. The watch ticked against her collarbone. It would tick for 7 more years before it told her what it knew. Roisin did not handle the loss well. She had loved Finian with the kind of total devotion that some women bring to a single man in their lives. And when he was gone, she could not find a way to continue. For the first year, she barely left the house. In the second year, she joined a grief support group at a community center in West Scranton. That's where she met Russell Coyne. He was 50 years old. He was a lighting consultant for commercial buildings. He had a calm voice and a way of nodding when other people spoke that made them feel listened to. He had lost his first wife to cancer 4 years before, or so he said. Roisin married him 6 months after they met. He moved into the row house on a Sunday afternoon in late spring. Maeve was 14. Russell was not a violent man. That's the thing about Russell. He was the other thing. He was the kind of man who could fill a room with cold so slowly that you didn't realize you were freezing until your fingers had already gone numb. He didn't yell, he didn't slam doors, he didn't hit, he just looked. He'd look at Maeve when she came down for breakfast. He'd look at her plate. He'd look at the silver pocket watch on the cord around her neck. He'd look at her grandfather's old pea coat hanging by the door, and his mouth would do a small thing at the corner. The kind of small thing that's not quite a smile and not quite a frown. It was a look that said, "You don't belong here anymore." Roisin saw it. Maeve was sure her mother saw it. But Roisin had been emptied out by grief, and Russell had walked into the empty room, and Roisin did not have the strength to ask him to leave. So Roisin stopped defending Maeve. She stopped at first by accident, then by habit, then by something that wasn't quite choice but wasn't quite not choice either. By the time Maeve was 16, she was no longer welcome at her own kitchen table, so she found another one. Helena Wojcik ran a small diner near the old D.L.&W. rail yards in Scranton. Helena was 62. She was a wide-shouldered woman with iron gray hair pinned back in a knot and the kind of forearms that come from 40 years of carrying plates. Her father had been Polish. Her mother had been Pennsylvania Dutch. Her English was perfect. Her coffee was better. She had been widowed twice, once by a steelworker, once by a yard switchman. She ran the diner the way she had run both marriages, with strong coffee, few wasted words, and an unspoken understanding that the people who came through her door were carrying things they did not always want to talk about. She hired Maeve on a Tuesday afternoon for the busser shift. She did not ask a single personal question for 6 months. When she finally did, Maeve was ready. The answering took most of an evening, and a whole pot of coffee, and the kind of patient listening that is harder to find in this world than gold. Helena knew Cormac's name when Maeve mentioned him. She had served Cormac eggs at the counter every Saturday morning for 19 years, before he retired. She knew Finian, too. She had brought a casserole to the wake when she put these pieces together. She looked at Maeve across the formica table in the back booth, and she said this, "Then this booth is yours, Donnelly girl, whenever you need it. You hear me?" Maeve heard her. She did not know yet how much she would need it. She finished high school living mostly out of her duffel bag. Some nights at the row house when Russell was working late. Some nights on the back bench in the diner kitchen after Helena had locked up. Some nights at a friend's apartment when the friend's parents weren't paying attention. She graduated in June. She turned 18 the same week. She got a second job at a diner on Wyoming Avenue. She tried to save. She made a list in a small notebook. The list said, rent, deposit, first month, last month, bus to somewhere, coat that fits. The list never quite got finished, because every time she saved $60, Russell would somehow know, and the dryer would break, or the heating bill would be late, or Roisin would need help with the rent on a place that wasn't hers. The money would disappear. The pocket watch ticked against her collarbone. She'd touch it through her sweater. She'd think, stubborn. She'd think, Donnellys don't bend. But she was bending. She just didn't know it yet. February, the week of her 20th birthday. She worked a closing shift at the diner on Wyoming Avenue. She got off at 11. She walked home in the cold. The walk was 27 minutes when the sidewalks were clear. That night, the sidewalks weren't clear, so it took 35. She came up the steps of the row house at midnight. Her ears were burning. Her fingers were numb in her grandfather's pea coat. And then she saw the box. It was a cardboard box, set on the front porch, centered carefully, like a gift, like something that had been arranged with thought. Inside the box were her clothes, and her textbooks, and the framed photograph of her father in his Conrail jacket, the one she kept on the shelf above her bed. And on top of the box, set carefully in the center, was the silver pocket watch on its leather cord, which meant that someone had gone into her room and opened the top drawer of her dresser, where she kept the watch on the nights she didn't wear it, and taken it out, and brought it down, and placed it on top of the box, so she could not pretend she had been forgotten. Maeve stood on the porch. She looked at the box. Her brain was doing a strange thing. It was working very slowly, like a car engine on a cold morning, trying to turn over. She looked at the front door. Taped to it, just below the peephole, was a folded sheet of lined notebook paper. She reached up. She took it off the door. She unfolded it. The handwriting was her mother's. It said, "Maeve, Russell and I have decided this is the best thing for everyone. You are an adult now. We need our own space. Please do not come back tonight or any night. Please do not call. Mom." Maeve read it once. She read it twice. And then she did something strange. She turned the paper sideways. She held it up to the porch light, and she looked at the letter M in her own name. Because her mother always wrote a Maeve with a hook on the bottom of the M, a little curl like a fish hook. Her mother had told her once, when Maeve was a little girl, that she liked the curl because it looked like the M was reaching down to hold the rest of the word. The M on this note had no curl. The M on this note went straight down and straight across, like a printed letter trying to look like cursive. Maeve stood on the porch in the cold. Her hands started to shake, not from the cold, from something else. She thought, wait, she thought, did Mom? She thought, no, she wouldn't. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't. Except this was not the time for a question Maeve could not answer. The time for that question was somewhere down the line, years down the line maybe. The time right now was the time to find a place to sleep. She tried the front door, locked. She tried the back door, locked. She walked around the side of the house, to the basement door from the alley, the one Russell had never bothered to deadbolt, because the lock was old and the key was somewhere lost. Locked, new deadbolt. shiny brass. He had done this on purpose. She stood in the alley behind her own house. The snow had picked up. She could feel it on the back of her neck where her hair fell away from her collar. And she did not cry, because crying was private weather, and the storm wasn't done yet. She picked up the box. She hung the silver pocket watch back around her neck on its leather cord. She tucked it under her sweater where it touched her skin, and she walked. 11 blocks to Helena's diner. She did not look back at the row house. She did not look back at the front porch where she had played as a little girl. She did not look back because if she looked back, she might stop, and she could not afford to stop. The watch ticked against her collarbone. It ticked, and ticked, and ticked. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, in an Allegheny Valley with no name on the state highway map, a small wooden building with a peaked roof and a faded green sign waited. But Maeve didn't know that yet. Helena was wiping down the counter when Maeve walked in. She was 62 years old. She had been on her feet since 5 in the morning, and she took one look at Maeve's face, and she walked over to the front door, and she turned the open sign to closed, and she locked the door. She didn't ask any questions. She pointed to the back booth. She walked behind the counter. She poured a mug of coffee. She made a plate of eggs and home fries. She set them down in front of Maeve. She said, "Eat." Maeve ate. When the plate was empty, Helena sat down across from her. Helena folded her hands on the formica table. She asked one question. "Tell me." Maeve told her. When she was done, Helena did not say anything for a long minute. She just looked at Maeve. Her eyes did not move. Then she got up. She walked to the back of the diner. She unlocked a door beside the storage room. She turned and looked at Maeve. She said, "Upstairs. Second door on the left. There's a bed. Sheets in the closet. Bathroom across the hall. You stay as long as you need." Maeve started to say something. Helena held up her hand. She said, "No, don't say it. Don't even think it. You are a Donnelly. Your grandfather ate eggs at my counter for 19 years. He was a good man. Your father was a better one. You will not pay me rent. You will work the morning shift Tuesday through Saturday. That is the rent." Helena's voice was steady. She said, "Now go upstairs." Maeve went upstairs. She lay down on a bed that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender soap. She put her hand on the silver pocket watch on its cord. She held it tight. She did not cry. She did not cry because the storm was not done. She did not cry because somewhere, in a part of her chest she could not yet name, something was beginning. Not hope, not yet. Something quieter. Something that ticked. She lived above Helena's diner for 2 months. Helena refused to let her pay rent. She said the rent was Maeve working the morning shift Tuesday through Saturday, which Maeve would have done for free anyway. Helena fed her 3 meals a day. She washed Maeve's clothes in the small machine in the diner basement. She left a fresh bar of lavender soap on the bathroom shelf every Sunday, because Maeve had mentioned, once, in passing, that her grandmother had used lavender soap. Helena remembered. That was the thing about Helena. She remembered. Those 2 months were the kindest 2 months of Maeve's life, but Maeve knew she could not stay forever. Helena was 62. The diner was getting harder for her to run alone. The early mornings were getting longer. The plates were getting heavier. The 30-year-old freezer in the back hummed like it was tired. Maeve did not want to be a person who needed someone else to carry her. Stubborn was a Donnelly word. It meant, we do not lean so hard on the people who love us that they break. So Maeve started looking for a place of her own. An apartment in Scranton on diner wages was a fantasy. She looked at rooms for rent in the rough parts of town. She walked through 3 of them. She could not bring herself to take any of them. Then, One Tuesday evening, at the back booth, with a cup of coffee, on the diner's old laptop that Helena kept for customers to use, Maeve typed something into the search bar. She typed, "Cheapest property, Pennsylvania," just to see, just to know what was possible. The first result was a junk site selling course materials. The second was a real estate scam. The third was a county tax sale page. The fourth was a list of foreclosures. The fifth was a page from a place called Penn Forest Township in the Allegheny foothills north of Bedford. The page was titled County Surplus Auction Nominal Sales Ahead of Demolition. It listed 11 abandoned buildings, a Grange Hall, a one-room schoolhouse, a creamery, a blacksmith shop, a dance pavilion, and near the bottom of the list, in small county clerk font, this former Penn Central / Penn RR branch line depot, Sparrows Bend Junction, abandoned 1958, scheduled for demolition spring of next year, price $10. Maeve sat very still. She read the listing 3 times. A train depot, for $10. She felt the watch tick against her collarbone. She did not move for a long time. Then she got up. She walked to the counter. She slid the laptop across to Helena. She said, "Helena, look at this." Helena leaned in. She read it through her reading glasses. She read it slowly. Then she read it again. She straightened up. She took her glasses off. She set them on the counter very carefully. And she said, "Sparrows Bend." Maeve said, "You know it." Helena said, "Donnelly girl. Sit down." Maeve sat down at the counter. Helena went into the back. She came back with a small wooden box, the kind of box that women of a certain age keep in a closet shelf, the kind that holds letters and old photographs and a wedding ring from a marriage that didn't last. Helena opened the box on the counter. She rummaged through it, carefully, the way you handle a thing you have not handled in a long time. She pulled out a postcard. It was old. The corners were soft. The image on the front was a black and white photograph of a train depot. Small, single story, dark board and batten siding, a peaked roof, a bay window projecting toward the platform. A faded sign above the bay window read, "Sparrows Bend, JCT Penn RR." Helena turned the postcard over. The handwriting on the back was neat and slanted. Maeve's stomach did something strange. She knew that handwriting. She had seen that handwriting on Christmas cards, on birthday cards, on the back of a photograph of herself at age 4, standing on a railroad platform. It was her grandfather Cormac's handwriting. Helena held the postcard out to her. Maeve took it with both hands. She read it. It said, "Helena, got the temporary assignment to the Bedford branch through August. Sparrows Bend is the loneliest stop on the division, but I won't complain. There is a station agent here named Silas who makes me coffee every morning at 5 before I take the freight out. He doesn't have to. He just does. I have never met a kinder man in this country. I will be back in Scranton by Labor Day. Save me a Saturday counter seat. Cormac, June 1953. Maeve read it twice. Her hands were not steady. She set the postcard down on the counter. She reached up. She unbuttoned the top of her sweater. She took the silver pocket watch off the cord around her neck. She held it under the light. She pressed the small notch on the back with her thumbnail. The back cover opened. And there, in letters so small that Helena had to lean in close to see them, were these SWSBJ 1953. Helena stared at the engraving. She stared at the postcard. She stared at Maeve. And then she said, very softly, the way a person says a thing they have just understood for the first time. She said, "Silas, SBJ is Sparrows Bend Junction, 1953. Maeve's voice was barely there. She said, "Helena, who was Silas?" Helena shook her head slowly. She said, "I don't know Donnelly, girl. Your grandfather mentioned him a few times over the years. He'd come into the diner some Saturday morning, and he'd be in a particular kind of mood. And he'd say something like, 'I miss the coffee at Sparrow's Bend.' And I would ask him why, and he would say, 'There was a station agent there once, a man named Silas. Best coffee on the division, best man on the division. The line shut down in '58, and I never saw him again.'" Helena paused. She said, "Your grandfather did not have many friends, Maeve. He worked too hard. He kept to himself. But Silas was a friend. I am sure of that." Maeve looked down at the watch in her hand. She thought, "SW on my grandfather's watch." She thought, "My grandfather's handwriting on a postcard about a man named Silas." She thought, "And now a depot at Sparrow's Bend, abandoned in 1958, for sale for $10. She felt the cold of the watch in her palm. She felt the warmth of Helena's hand on her shoulder. She did not understand what was happening yet. But she understood this. The watch had been ticking, and ticking, and ticking, against her collarbone for 7 years, since the day she was 13 and her grandfather died. It had been telling her something. She just had not been able to hear it. Until now. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the small bed above the diner. She held the silver pocket watch in both hands. She read the engraving with her thumb in the dark. S.W. B.J. 1953. She thought about her grandfather's hands, the way they had looked when he was old, knotted, strong, spotted with the small, dark marks that old hands get, the way he had held the watch out to her at the funeral home before the casket was closed for her father. He had said, "This is yours now, girl. It's been on a Donnelly chest for a long time. It will be on a Donnelly chest until the last Donnelly is gone." She thought about her father, the way he had said the office felt like wearing somebody else's coat. She thought about her mother, the way the M had been wrong, the wrong M. No fishhook, no curl. She thought about Russell, the look at the breakfast table. She thought about Helena, the way Helena had said, "Donnelly, girl, sit down." And she thought about the depot at the end of a forgotten branch line. In a township so small the state had stopped putting it on the map in 1972. A small wooden building with a peaked roof, a faded green sign, a bay window where a station agent had once watched for incoming trains, a man named Silas who had made coffee at 5 in the morning for a young brakeman named Cormac. For $10, she thought. That depot is older than my grandfather was, she thought, and it has been waiting. She did not know yet for what, but she knew this. She was going to find out. Donnellys did not bend. Donnellys turned into the weather. She got up at 5:30. She made a pot of coffee in the small kitchenette of her room above the diner. She drank it standing up at the window. She watched the snow taper off over the empty street. When the light came up over the roof of the building across the way, she went downstairs. Helena was at the counter, apron tied, coffee already brewing. Maeve said, "I'm going to Bedford." Helena nodded. She did not look surprised. She said, "Take the watch, take the postcard, take what you can carry. I'll write you down for 2 days off. Bring me back something with the Penn Forest name on it, a receipt, a matchbook, anything. I want to know you got there," Maeve said. Helena, "I don't know what I'm doing," Helena said. "Yes, you do. You're going to the place the watch has been telling you to go for 7 years. You just didn't have the address until last night." Maeve stood very still. She put the watch in the inside pocket of her grandfather's peacoat, the same inside pocket where she would 2 days later fold a $10 bill. She picked up her duffel bag. Helena walked her to the front door of the diner. She held it open. She said, "Donnelly, girl." Maeve turned. Helena said, "Whatever you find at Sparrow's Bend, you come back here when you need to. You always have a counter seat. You hear me?" Maeve heard her. She walked out into the cold morning. The bus station was 8 blocks. She walked them quickly. Her boots crunched on the salt and the leftover snow. Her duffel bag slapped against her hip. The watch ticked against her collarbone in a rhythm she had known her entire life. Tick, 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 tick. She was 20 years old. She was homeless. She had a $10 bill and a duffel bag and the silver pocket watch and a postcard from 1953 and her grandfather's coat. And she was going to a depot at Sparrow's Bend Junction to buy a building from a county that was going to tear it down in the spring. She bought the bus ticket with money Helena had pushed into her hand at the door. The bus pulled out of Scranton at 7:42. She sat in the back. She watched the city give way to suburbs. The suburbs give way to farms. The farms give way to woods. She watched the Pennsylvania ridges roll past, hardwood bare and gray in February. She put her hand on her chest. She felt the watch through the coat. She thought, I don't know what's at the end of this line, she thought, but somebody is waiting. And somewhere down the rails her grandfather had ridden for 32 years, in an Allegheny valley where the only sound at midnight was the river. A small wooden building with a peaked roof and a sealed compartment beneath the floor of the old ticket booth had been waiting for 67 years. It was patient. Stations were always patient. It would wait 2 more days. The bus from Scranton to Bedford took most of a day. 2 transfers, 3 station benches, 4 cups of vending machine coffee that tasted like dust and warm water. By the time Maeve stepped off the final bus at a crossroads in the Allegheny foothills, the sun was sitting low, orange behind the bare ridges, already starting to slide. She was 4 miles from the township office. There was no taxi, there was no Uber, there was no anything. Just a county road, 2 lanes, no shoulder, bare hardwood on both sides, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses on your ears. She started walking. The duffel bag was light. The pea coat was heavy. The watch ticked against her collarbone in the cold like a small, steady drum. She walked. The road wound through a narrow valley. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke and something else. Something she could not name. Something like iron and cold water and old creosote. It smelled like railroad. It smelled like home. She did not understand why a place she had never been smelled like home. But she did not slow down to think about it. She just walked. The Penn Forest Township office was a small frame building beside a closed general store, on a single main street, with 7 other buildings on it, and 1 stoplight that blinked yellow because there was not enough traffic to justify a real one. Maeve stood outside the office. She caught her breath. She straightened her grandfather's coat. She tucked her hair behind her ears. She set her duffel bag down beside her feet. She walked in. A woman in her early 50s sat behind a counter. She had a mug of tea. She had a stack of property records. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and the kind of square shoulders that come from a lifetime of carrying other people's paperwork without complaint. Her nameplate said Beatrice Kettering, Township Clerk. She looked up. She looked at Maeve. She looked at the duffel bag. She looked at the pea coat. She looked at Maeve again. She said, "You're the one who called about the depot," Maeve said. "Yes, ma'am," Beatrice said. "From Scranton," Maeve said. "Yes, ma'am," Beatrice said. "You took the bus," Maeve said. "Yes, ma'am," Beatrice said. "And then you walked," Maeve said. "Yes, ma'am." Beatrice took her glasses off. She set them on the counter. She studied Maeve for a long moment. And then she did something Maeve did not expect. She walked around the counter. She went to a small electric kettle on a side table. She filled a mug from a tin on a shelf. She poured hot water over a tea bag. She added a spoonful of honey from a jar. She brought the mug back. She set it in front of Maeve. She said, "Drink, then we'll talk." Maeve drank. Her hands were shaking by the time the mug was empty. Not from the cold, from the fact that her hands had forgotten what it felt like to be warm. Beatrice waited. When the mug was empty, Beatrice pulled a deed book from a shelf behind her. She turned to a page. The page was marked with a small red ribbon, like someone had been holding it, waiting. She said, "You know it's been closed since 1958, Maeve said. "Yes, ma'am," Beatrice said. The track was pulled up in '61. The county had it on a demolition list since 1989. We just kept pushing it down. Nobody wanted to be the one to sign the order. Maeve said. "Why?" Beatrice said. "Because some buildings have weight, child. Even when they're empty, even when they're falling apart. Some buildings are still holding something, and nobody around here wanted to be the one to tear it down." She paused. She said, "The demolition order is signed now, March 15th, spring weather," she said. "Unless somebody takes it," Maeve said. "I have $10. Beatrice nodded. She slid the deed book across the counter. She said, "Sign here, and here, and here." Maeve signed. She wrote Maeve Mary Donnelly in the careful slanted hand her grandfather had taught her, the same hand he had used to write a postcard to a Polish-American diner owner in Scranton in June of 1953. Beatrice took the $10 bill. She folded it once. She tucked it into a metal cash box on the counter. She stamped the deed with a brass stamp that made a soft, flat sound. She said, "It's yours." Maeve stared at the deed. She said, "That's it," Beatrice said. "That's it," Maeve said. "A building for $10, Beatrice said. "A patient building for $10. There's a difference." She pulled a brass key out of a small drawer behind the counter. The key was old. The metal was dull. The bow at the top was shaped like a small star. Beatrice put the key in Maeve's hand. She said, "My husband Frank is outside in the green truck. He'll drive you the 1.5 miles. There's a bench inside that'll do for sleeping if you've got a sleeping bag. The well still works if you prime the pump." She paused. She said, "I'll come back in 2 days. To check on you," Maeve said. "Why?" Beatrice said. "Because I want to." That was the whole answer. Maeve picked up her duffel bag. She walked out of the township office, into the late afternoon light, toward a green pickup truck that was idling at the curb with an older man in a flannel jacket behind the wheel. He nodded at her once. She climbed in. The truck pulled away, and the watch ticked against her collarbone. The old rail bed ran straight through the woods, a long, shallow scar, 1.5 miles of vanished steel. Frank Kettering did not say a single word the entire drive. He let her out at the end of the access road where the rail bed widened into what had once been the passing siding. He tipped his cap. He drove away. And Maeve was alone in a clearing with a building. It stood at the far end of the clearing, single story. Dark red board and batten siding faded to the color of dried clay. A wide overhanging eave running the length of the platform side. A peaked shingle roof. A small bay window projecting toward where the tracks had once been. A tall brick chimney rising from the back wall, above the bay window, painted in faded white letters on a dark green board. The sign, Sparrow's Bend, JCT, Pen, RR. She stood and looked at it for a long time. She thought, "This is the building on the postcard," she thought. "My grandfather stood on this platform," she thought. 72 years ago, in the summer, he stood right here, and a man named Silas brought him a cup of coffee. The platform was still there, weathered boards, greened with moss. The boards sagged in places, but they held. She walked up onto the platform. She walked to the waiting room door. The brass key in her pocket felt warm. She put it in the lock. She turned it. The lock clicked. The door opened. The waiting room. A single long room. Slate floor scuffed soft by 60 years of feet. Dark wainscoting on the walls. A wooden bench along one wall. A black pot-bellied stove in the corner. The flue blackened with the smoke of 10,000 cold mornings. The air inside was colder than the air outside. It smelled like cinder and paper and the faint sweet smell of pine boards. It smelled like time. She walked the length of the room slowly. Her boots tapped on the slate. The sound was small in the big quiet of the place. She put her hand on the cold iron of the pot-bellied stove. She put her hand on the wooden bench, and at the far end of the room, in the wall beneath the bay window, she saw it. The closed wooden door of the ticket booth. She walked toward it. She put her hand on the brass knob. She turned. The booth was 6 feet square. A high wooden agent's desk, facing the bay window, a tall wooden stool, a row of pigeonholes built into the wall above the desk, for waybills and receipts. A small iron safe with a combination dial sat on the floor in the corner. A chalkboard mounted on the wall, the last entry on the chalkboard, still ghosted in faint white chalk. After 67 years, 6:42 p.m. eastbound, final. Maeve stood in the doorway. Her throat was tight. She walked to the desk. She put her hand on the wood. The desk was worn smooth by elbows, by hands, by the 10,000 small movements of a man who had sat at this desk every working day from 1932 to 1958. She sat down on the stool. She looked out through the bay window. The light was going. The empty railbed stretched away into the trees. She thought. Silas sat here, she thought, and before me, and before my grandfather, and before any of this, she thought. He sat here and waited for trains. Then, she slid off the stool, because something had caught her eye. The floorboards beneath the stool were a slightly different color than the boards around them. Darker, as if they had been replaced at some point, and had aged differently. She knelt down. She ran her fingertips along the seam where the dark boards met the lighter ones. She felt a gap, a deliberate gap, smooth cut, the kind that does not happen by accident. Her heart was doing something strange. It was beating very slowly. She got up. She walked back out to the freight room. She found a piece of flat iron in the corner, something that might once have been part of a switch lever. She came back to the booth. She knelt down. She used the iron to pry up the edge of the dark boards. They came up together, in a single small section, maybe 18 inches square, hinged on a pair of leather hinges that had hardened with age, but had not broken. She set the boards aside. She looked down. Underneath was a small wooden compartment fitted into the floor joists. Inside the compartment, lying on a folded piece of old oilcloth, a tin lock box, a sealed envelope, a small folded American flag, a second sealed envelope, smaller, pushed against the side, almost hidden. Maeve sat back on her heels. She did not move. She breathed. She breathed in. She breathed out. She thought. Don't touch it yet, she thought. This is somebody's life under this floor, she thought. Be careful. She lifted out the flag first. It was small, a 48-star flag, which meant it was folded before 1959, before Alaska, before Hawaii. The triangular military fold was tight. The corners were sharp. Someone had folded this flag with great care a long time ago. She set it on the desk. She lifted out the first envelope. The paper was thick, cream-colored. The ink on the front had faded to brown. The handwriting was a careful slant. It said, "To whoever finds this." Her hands were shaking. She set the envelope on the desk beside the flag. She lifted out the tin lock box. It was heavy. She set it on the desk. She lifted out the smaller second envelope. This one had no address on the front. It was just a plain cream envelope, sealed with red wax. The wax had cracked but held. She held it in her hand. She did not open it yet. She set it on top of the lock box. She sat down on the stool again. She looked at the 4 objects on the desk: the flag, the first envelope, the lock box, the second envelope. She thought, one of these things is going to change my life. She did not yet know it would be more than one. She opened the lockbox first. Because the lockbox she could understand. Money was money. Money was the easy thing. The lid lifted. Inside, in neat rows, bundled banknotes. Old-style United States currency. 20s and 50s. From the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. A small stack of hundreds held together with paper bands. The paper bands crumbled at the edges when she touched them. The dust from the bands smelled like time. She counted slowly. She lost her count twice. She started again. $9,320. Beneath the bills was a small leather pouch. She lifted it out. She loosened the drawstring. Inside, 11 silver dollars, each wrapped in a small square of tissue paper. The tissue had yellowed but held. She unwrapped one. A Morgan silver dollar. Heavy. The eagle on the back. The portrait on the front. The year 1921. She set it on the desk, and beneath the silver dollars, at the very bottom of the pouch, wrapped in a soft chamois cloth, a pocket watch. She lifted it out. She unwrapped the chamois. It was a Hamilton 992B in a silver hunting case, on a worn leather cord. It was identical to her grandfather's, the same maker, the same model, the same case, the same kind of leather cord, the standard timepiece of every Pennsylvania railroad agent and conductor. Maeve held it in her left hand. In her right hand, pulled from under her sweater, was her grandfather's. 2 silver watches, side by side, on the desk where Silas Whitcomb had sat for 26 years. She pressed the small notch on the back of Silas's watch. The back cover opened. Inside, engraved in letters so small she had to hold it under the bay window's last light to read. SWSBJ, 1934. 2 watches. Same maker. Same case. Same cord. One engraved 1934. The other engraved 1953. The same hand had done both engravings. Maeve set both watches on the desk. Her hands were no longer shaking. She had gone very still. She thought. Silas engraved my grandfather's watch. She thought. Or my grandfather's watch was given to him by Silas. She thought. One of those things is true, she thought, and I don't know which one. She picked up the first envelope. She slid her thumb under the flap. The seal broke softly. She pulled out the letter. The letter was on heavy cream paper. The ink was brown with age. The handwriting was clear and careful, the hand of a man who had spent his life filling out way-bills and timetables in a small, neat slant. It said, "To whoever finds this, my name is Silas Whitcomb. I have been the station agent at Sparrow's Bend Junction on the Bedford branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad from 1932 until today, the 17th of June, 1958. The branch line is being closed at the end of this week. The last passenger train will run on Friday evening. After that, the rails will be pulled, the building will be locked, and there will be no reason for anyone to come here again. I am 64 years old. I have no children. My wife Elspeth passed in the influenza spring of 1949. I have spent my life at this small junction, watching trains come in from Bedford in the morning and go out toward Pittsburgh at night. I have known every regular passenger by name. I have made a pot of coffee every morning at 5 o'clock for the brakemen on the through freights, even though it was not part of my duties. I considered it my duty anyway. Coffee is a small kindness. A small kindness on a cold morning is sometimes the difference between a good day and a hard one. I have saved a portion of every paycheck I ever drew in this lockbox, beneath the floor of the booth where I have sat for 26 years. I do not trust banks. I lost what little I had in the failure of the Bedford Trust in 1933, and I have nowhere else to put what I have saved. The silver dollars are from Elspeth's family. The Hamilton watch was issued to me by the railroad in 1934. I am leaving it behind because I do not want to carry railroad time after Friday. A man who is no longer a railroad man should not pretend to keep railroad time. If you are reading this letter, you came into this depot after I am gone, maybe long after. Maybe the building has been forgotten. Maybe you came looking for shelter or quiet or a place to begin again. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know that the depot has been waiting for you. A small station is a patient thing. It waits for the train, and then it waits for the next train. And then, when there are no more trains, it waits for whoever will come next. I have been the one waiting at Sparrows Bend Junction since 1932. I am leaving the waiting to you now. Take what is in this box. It is for you. The flag is from Elspeth's brother. He was a brakeman on the Erie. He was killed in a coupling accident in 1944. Keep the flag folded the way I have folded it. Be kind to the building. The coffee tastes better here than anywhere on the division. I do not know why, and I have stopped trying to find out. Silas Whitcomb, Station Agent, Sparrows Bend Junction, June 17th, 1958. Maeve read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully along its old creases. She placed it back in its envelope. She sat very still on the floor of the ticket booth, with the bank notes and the silver dollars and the Hamilton pocket watch in her lap, and the small folded flag beside her. She did not cry. She was a Donnelly. Donnellys did not cry. Crying was private weather. But she said, aloud, to the empty depot, to whoever might be listening, "Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb." The depot did not answer, but the light was changing through the bay window. Orange, almost gone, and the silence was the warm kind of silence, the kind that listens back. She picked up the second envelope, the one with the red wax. She broke the seal. She unfolded the paper inside. The second letter was shorter. It was written in the same careful slant, but the handwriting was a little less steady, as if the hand that wrote it had been older, or sadder, or both. It said, "To the girl who will come." Maeve's breath stopped. She read again, "To the girl who will come." She kept reading. "I have written one letter, to whoever may find this. That letter is the public one. This letter is for you. I do not know your name. I do not know what you look like. I do not know what year it will be when you sit on this stool and pry up these boards. But my wife knew you. Elspeth was sick the spring of 1949. The flu took her in 2 weeks. She was 38 years old. The night before she died, she was lying in the bed in the small house behind the depot, and she said to me, "Silas, I have had a dream. I have had this dream 3 times now. I want to tell you before I forget it." She said, "There is a young woman who will come to this depot. She is alone. She has a silver pocket watch on a leather cord. She is wearing a heavy dark coat. She has cold hands and stubborn eyes." Elspeth said, "She is coming in the winter. There is snow on the ground. She does not know what she is looking for, but she belongs here. Silas, you must leave her everything, everything we have, everything we ever had, because she will need it, and nobody else will need it after us." I asked Elspeth, When does she come?" Elspeth said, "I cannot tell. I only know that she is coming, and the building knows. I have spent the last 9 years waiting for that young woman, and tomorrow, Friday, the line shuts down, and I will lock the door for the last time, and I will not be able to wait any more. So I am leaving the waiting to the building. The building knows how to wait, better than I do, if you are reading this." Then Elspeth was right, as she was right about everything. Please understand. You did not stumble in here. You were not lost. You did not buy this place by accident. You were brought. By what? I do not know. By a dream. By a watch? By a kindness someone did for someone else many years ago? I do not know. I have stopped trying to know. Use what we have left you. Be kind to the building. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to whoever comes next. Elspeth said one more thing the night before she died. She said, Silas, when you see her, you will know her, because she will have the eyes of someone we already love. I do not know what that means, but you will. S.W. Maeve put the letter down on the desk. She put her hands over her face, and for the first time since her father died, 8 years ago, she cried. She cried like a person who had been carrying weather inside her for a long time, and had finally found a place to set it down. She cried on the floor of a ticket booth in a depot that had been waiting for her. The sun went down outside. The bay window went dark. The 2 silver watches ticked together on the desk. And the depot, the patient depot, listened. She did not sleep that night. She built a small fire in the pot-bellied stove with kindling she found in a box behind the freight room. She unrolled a sleeping bag she had carried in her duffel. She lay down on the wooden bench in the waiting room. The 2 watches sat on the bench beside her, synchronized, ticking. She watched the firelight on the slate floor. She thought, Elspeth dreamed me. She thought, a woman I never met, who died years before I was born, dreamed me, she thought. That cannot be true, she thought, and yet here I am. She thought, a young woman, alone, silver pocket watch, heavy dark coat, snow on the ground, cold hands, stubborn eyes. She looked at her hands in the firelight. They were cold. She thought, stubborn eyes. She thought, my grandfather's eyes. She thought. She said, you will know her because she will have the eyes of someone we already love. She put her face down against the wool of her sleeping bag. She did not cry again. She had already cried. She slept finally, with both watches ticking beside her ear. In her dream, she was on a platform. The sun was high. It was summer. A train was coming. She could feel the rails humming. A young man in a Pennsylvania Railroad uniform stood beside her. He turned to her. He had her grandfather's face, but younger, 20-something. He smiled. He said, hello, girl. She woke at dawn. The fire was out. The watches were ticking. She was not alone. Beatrice came back 2 days later. As promised, she brought a thermos of coffee, a loaf of bread, a small bag of apples, and a folder. The folder had property records, tax history, utility paperwork, everything Maeve would need. Beatrice walked into the waiting room. She looked at the swept floor. She looked at the fire in the stove. She looked at the bench where Maeve had been sleeping. She looked at the 2 silver watches on the desk of the ticket booth. She did not ask about the watches. She set the thermos and the bread and the apples on the bench. She said, you stayed. Maeve said, I stayed. Beatrice said, good. She turned to leave. Then she turned back. She said, I want to introduce you to 2 people. They live nearby. They can help. Maeve said. Who? Beatrice said. Augustus Brennan. Everyone calls him Gus. He's 70. He was a Finnish carpenter for 42 years. He retired 10 years ago, and he's been bored ever since. He owes me a favor. Or 4, she said. And Theodore Ashworth. Ted. He's 68. He was an engineer on the Conrail Northeast Corridor for 30 years. He has more railroad memorabilia in his attic than the Reading Museum. He has been waiting for somebody to come to Sparrow's Bend his entire life. Beatrice paused. She said, you are not going to do this alone, child. I will not let you. Maeve did not know what to say to that. So she said, thank you. Beatrice said, don't thank me yet. Gus will eat all your apples and Ted will tell you 45 stories about the same locomotive. You'll be sorry by Tuesday. She walked out. She drove away. Maeve sat on the platform bench with a thermos of coffee. She had a building. She had $9,320. She had 2 silver watches. She had a folded flag. She had 2 letters from a dead man. She had a dream from a dead woman. She had a community. She did not know what to do with any of it. But for the first time, in a long time, the not knowing did not scare her. The not knowing was a kind of weather. She could turn into it. Gus Brennan was a wide-shouldered man with white hair and a face that looked permanently amused. He drove an old Ford pickup that rattled. He arrived at the depot 2 days after Beatrice, with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee and an expression that said, "Show me the worst of it." He walked the perimeter of the building. He stood under the collapsed corner of the freight room roof. He looked up. He scratched his chin. He said, "Yeah," Maeve said. "Yeah," Gus said. "Yeah. 2 weeks. New rafters. Resh shingle. We can patch the bay window in a day if you got the glass. Stove flue needs cleaning. Well pump needs a new gasket. You got a roof over your head by month's end if you don't mind blisters." Maeve said, "I have money. I can pay you," Gus said. "Did I ask for money?" Maeve said. "No," Gus said. "Then don't insult me." Ted Ashworth showed up the next morning. He came in a station wagon. He brought a crate of railroad memorabilia he had been keeping in his attic for 40 years. Old timetables, a brass conductor's lantern, a Pennsylvania Railroad porcelain mug with a slight chip on the rim, a section of original rail with the date 1928 stamped into the web. He set the crate on the platform. He said, "These belong here more than they belong with me." He looked at the depot. His eyes got soft. He said, "I used to ride past this place as a boy. My father was an engineer. He'd point this junction out every time." He said, "Teddy, that's where the kind man lives. Mr. Whitcomb makes coffee for the brakeman." He paused. He said, "I never met him. The line shut down when I was 10. But my father said, 'Teddy, if you ever meet a man like Silas Whitcomb, you hold on tight.'" He looked at Maeve. He said, "I never met a man like him. I'm too old now. But maybe." He didn't finish. Maeve said, "Maybe you met somebody who knew somebody." Ted smiled. He said, "Yes, maybe that." Helena Wojcik drove down in the second month. She came in her old sedan with a carload of things from the room above the diner, a few of Maeve's clothes, a box of books, the framed photograph of Finian Donnelly in his Conrail jacket that Maeve had not been able to look at since the funeral. Helena stayed 3 days. She slept on a folding cot in the freight room. She helped Maeve paint the inside of the ticket booth a soft cream color that made the small space feel twice as big. On the morning she left, Helena stood beside her car in the clearing. She looked at the depot. She looked at Maeve. She said, "Cormac would be proud." She said, "Your father would be proud." She said, "You are a Donnelly in the only way that matters." She drove back to Scranton. Maeve sat on the platform bench for a long time afterward, and she finally let herself cry, for the second time, about her father, about her mother, about a row house she would not see again, about a man named Silas Whitcomb she had never met. The watches ticked beside her. By April, the freight room roof was tight. By May, the bay window held new glass. By June, the pot-bellied stove was cleaned. The waiting room had a swept slate floor, a fresh coat of paint, a row of curtains Beatrice had sewn. Maeve made a small bedroom for herself in the freight room, an iron cot, a wool blanket, a small kerosene lamp. On the shelf above the cot, she set the framed photograph of her father, and the folded flag from Elspeth's brother, and her grandfather's silver pocket watch. The Hamilton 992B that had belonged to Silas she kept on the agent's desk in the ticket booth, wound, set to railroad time, the way Silas would have kept it. She started serving coffee. It was not a business at first. It was just a thing she did. The way Silas had done it for the brakemen on the through freights, even though it was not part of his duties. She kept a kettle hot on the pot-bellied stove. She kept a stack of mismatched mugs on the bay window shelf, and any walker who came down the old rail bed could come into the waiting room and have a cup. She did not charge. People left small things, a jar of honey, a loaf of bread, a handful of wildflowers, a folded $5 bill in a tin on the bench. The depot was alive again, for the first time in 67 years. And then, in late June, the man came. He drove a black SUV with Pittsburgh plates. He parked at the end of the access road. He walked down the platform in a charcoal suit. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. He was about 55 years old. He had a careful haircut. He had a careful smile. He had the kind of eyes that did not change shape when he smiled. He stepped onto the platform. He said, "Are you Maeve Donnelly?" Maeve was sweeping the platform. She stopped sweeping. She said, "Yes." He said, "My name is Eamon Whitcomb. I am the great-nephew of Silas Whitcomb. I believe you have something that belongs to my family." Maeve set the broom down. The watch on her chest. Tick. The other watch. On the desk inside. Tick. She said, "Excuse me." Eamon smiled the smile that did not reach his eyes. He said, "The lockbox, the money, the watch, the silver dollars. They were my uncle's personal property, as his only living relative. They are mine, by inheritance, by blood, by every law that matters in this state." He held up the leather portfolio. He said, "I have documentation. I have a copy of the family tree. I have an attorney in Pittsburgh who is ready to file a quiet title action by the end of the week. Unless, of course, we can come to a private agreement." He paused. He said, "I am a reasonable man. I do not want this to be ugly." Maeve looked at him. Her hands were not shaking. That surprised her. She thought, stubborn. She thought, "Donnellys do not bend," she said. "Mr. Whitcomb, the deed to this property is in my name. I bought it from Penn Forest Township for $10, with a legal sale and a stamped deed. The contents of the property are mine." Eamon's smile got smaller. He said, "The deed conveys the structure, not the personal effects. The personal effects belong to my uncle, and under Pennsylvania probate law, after 67 years, those effects revert to the closest living blood relative, which is me," Maeve said. "Mr. Whitcomb, I think you need to leave," Eamon said. "I will leave, today, but I will be back, with my attorney, with a court order, and with an inventory." He set a business card on the platform bench. He turned. He walked back to the SUV. He drove away. Maeve stood on the platform. The watch on her chest ticked harder than it had ticked in days. She picked up the business card. It said, "Eamon J. Whitcomb, Heritage Asset Recovery, Pittsburgh, PA." She thought, "Heritage Asset Recovery." She thought, "That is not a real thing." She thought, "Or is it?" She did not know. She did know one thing. She walked into the township office that afternoon. She put the business card on Beatrice's counter. She said, "Beatrice, I need help." Beatrice looked at the card. She looked at Maeve. She picked up the phone. She said, "I'll call my cousin in Pittsburgh. She runs a probate clinic at the law school. We'll know what this man is by Friday." Beatrice's cousin called back on Thursday. Beatrice came out to the depot in person to tell Maeve. She sat down on the platform bench. She took her glasses off. She held them in her lap. She said, "Eamon Whitcomb is not Silas Whitcomb's great-nephew," Maeve said. "Wait." What Beatrice said. Silas Whitcomb had one sister, Margaret Whitcomb, born 1900. She had no children. She died in 1972. "Childless," Beatrice said. Silas had no other siblings, no cousins, No nieces, no nephews. The Whitcomb line ended in 1972, Maeve said. Then who? Beatrice said. Eamon Whitcomb legally changed his name from Eamon Brody in 2011, after he was arrested in Pittsburgh on a charge of elder fraud. He has changed his name 3 times. He looks for property records of childless decedents in rural Pennsylvania. He builds fake family trees. He shows up. He intimidates the new owners. He gets settlements. He runs. Beatrice put her glasses back on. She said, "He has done this in 7 counties. He has never gone to court, because he can't. If he ever shows up in front of a judge with that fake family tree, he goes to prison." Maeve sat down on the bench. She put her hand on the back of her neck. She thought, "I almost gave him the money." She thought, "I almost let him have it." She thought, "If Beatrice wasn't here, I would have lost everything." Beatrice said, "The next time he calls, you give him my number. I will explain to him, in language he understands, that he is not welcome in Penn Forest Township, and if he sets foot on this platform again, I am personally driving him to the county jail," Maeve said. Beatrice said. "Yes," Maeve said. "Why are you doing this?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment. She said, "Because 43 years ago, when I was 19, my father threw me out of the house. For reasons. I walked into this very township office. I had $11. I sat where you sat, and the woman behind the counter at the time was named Doris Beecher. She said, 'Sit down, child.' She poured me tea. She found me a room with a widow on Maple Street. I lived there for 2 years. Doris died in 1994. She never asked me to repay her." Beatrice paused. She said, "So I'm paying her, by paying you. That's how it works." She stood up. She straightened her coat. She said, "I'll see you Wednesday." She walked to her car. She drove away. Maeve sat on the platform until the sun went down. She had a building. She had a community. She had a story that was not finished. And then her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text message, from a number she did not recognize. She opened it. She read it. She read it again. The message said, "Maeve, this is your mother. Please, can we talk? I saw the article in the paper. Russell wants to come too. He says we need to discuss the inheritance. Please, I am sorry." Maeve stared at the screen. She thought, "Article in the paper." She thought, "What article?" She thought, "Oh." She thought, "Oh no." A small story had run in the Bedford Gazette 2 weeks earlier. Young woman saves historic depot. Townspeople rally to help. It had been a kind story, a local feel-good story. She had not thought it would travel. She had not thought it would reach Scranton. She had not thought it would reach Russell. She read the text again. "Russell wants to come too." Her hands started to shake. Not from cold, from something else. She thought, "He is coming." She thought, "Of course he is coming." She put the phone back in her pocket. She walked into the ticket booth. She picked up Silas's Hamilton watch from the agent's desk. She held it in her palm. She felt the small, steady tick. She thought, a young woman, alone. Silver pocket watch, cold hands, stubborn eyes. She thought, I am still her. She thought, and he can come. She thought, but I am not bending. She closed her hand around the watch. The watch ticked, and ticked, and ticked. Outside. The light was going. Inside. A small fire burned in the pot-bellied stove. The depot listened. It had waited 67 years for this. It could wait a little longer. She did not answer the text that night. She did not answer it the next morning. She sat on the platform bench with a mug of coffee, and she watched the dawn come up over the eastern ridge. The sun was warm on her face. The birds were starting. A red-tailed hawk drifted on a thermal above the railbed. She thought, "If I answer, he comes," she thought. "If I don't answer, he still comes," she thought. "The only thing I get to choose is whether I see it coming." She picked up the phone. She typed, "Mom, you can come. Russell stays in the car. That is the only way." She hit send. The reply came back in less than a minute. "Thank you. Saturday, 11 a.m. I love you." Maeve set the phone down on the bench. She did not reply to the "I love you," because she did not yet know if she could say it back. And she would not say it just to be kind. She was a Donnelly. She did not bend. Beatrice came that afternoon. She brought a folder. She set the folder on the platform bench. She said, "Open it." Maeve opened it. Inside was a photocopy, yellow and faded, of an original document on heavy paper. The top of the document said, "Last Will and Testament of Silas Arthur Whitcomb, Penn Forest Township, Pennsylvania, June 17th, 1958. Maeve looked up. She said, "Where did you?" Beatrice said, "The vault. Basement of the courthouse in Bedford. My cousin's clinic helped me requisition it. It took 2 weeks." She paused. She said, "Read the third paragraph." Maeve read, "I, Silas, Arthur Whitcomb, being of sound mind and body, do hereby disinherit any and all members of the Whitcomb family by blood or marriage in perpetuity. My sister Margaret has her own. She does not need mine. I have no other relations. Any individual claiming inheritance through the Whitcomb name after my passing is to be regarded as making a false claim. The contents of my personal effects, hidden or otherwise, are to be considered the property of whoever discovers them in good faith on the premises of the Sparrows Bend Junction Depot by the act of discovery itself, with no further claim possible by any party." Maeve read it twice, then a third time. She looked up at Beatrice. She said, "He knew." Beatrice said, "He knew." Maeve said, "He knew somebody would try this." Beatrice said, "A man who hides money under a floor knows that other men will look for money under a floor. He wrote the will the same day he wrote the letter. He thought of everything." She closed the folder. She said, "Mr. Eamon Whitcomb got a phone call from a Pittsburgh attorney this morning. The attorney was not retained by him. The attorney was retained by me. The attorney explained the situation. The attorney sent a copy of this will, by certified mail, to Mr. Whitcomb's last known address." Beatrice took her glasses off. She polished them on her sleeve. She put them back on. She said, "Mr. Whitcomb will not be returning." Maeve sat down on the bench. She put her hand over her mouth. She was not crying. She was almost laughing. It came out as something in between, a small, wet sound, from a chest that had been holding fear for 2 weeks, and was now letting some of it go. She said, "Beatrice." Beatrice said, "Don't." Maeve said, "I'm going to anyway." Beatrice said, "Fine." Maeve stood up. She walked over. She hugged the township clerk of Penn Forest, the way a daughter hugs the woman who saved her from a thing she did not even know was about to drown her. Beatrice stood very still for a moment. Then she put her arms around Maeve. She patted Maeve's back 3 times, firmly, like a person who was not used to hugs, but who had decided to be good at this one. She said, all right, let go now." She let go. She walked back to her car. She drove away. The first twist was untwisting. 2 more were coming. Saturday came, 11 o'clock. Maeve sat on the platform bench. She wore her grandfather's peacoat. The watch was around her neck. The Hamilton was on the agent's desk inside, set to railroad time. She had not slept well. She had rehearsed 3 different versions of this conversation in her head. All 3 of them were wrong. She had stopped rehearsing. She thought, "I am 20 years old," she thought. She is my mother, she thought. That is the whole inventory. The car pulled in at 5 minutes past 11. It was a small gray sedan she did not recognize. The driver's door opened. Roisin Burke got out. She was alone. She had not brought Russell. She had not even brought his car. She walked across the gravel slowly, like a woman who had not quite decided whether her legs were going to hold. She stopped at the bottom of the platform steps. She looked up at Maeve. She was 45 years old. She looked 60. Her hair was still dark, but it was shot through with gray. Her cheeks had hollowed. Her eyes had the look of someone who had not slept well for a long time. She said, "Maeve." Maeve said, "Mom." That was all either of them could manage for a long minute. Roisin came up the steps. She did not try to hug Maeve. She sat down on the bench. She kept a careful distance. Like a person sitting next to a bird, she did not want to startle. Maeve sat too, she said. "Where is Russell?" Roisin said. "He doesn't know I'm here." Maeve looked at her. Roisin said, "I took the bus. I told him I was going to my sister's in Allentown. I rented this car in Bedford this morning. With cash, I have been saving in a coffee can in the basement," Maeve said. "Why?" Roisin said. "Because there are things I need to tell you that I could not say with him in the car." Maeve felt the watch tick against her collarbone. She thought, "Here it comes." Roisin took a long breath. She said, "I did not write the note." Maeve went very still. She said, "The note." Roisin said, "The note on the door. That night, in February. The one that said Russell and I had decided. The one with my name on it." Roisin's hands were folded in her lap. She was looking at them. She said, "I did not write it." Maeve could not get a breath in. She said, "Then," Roisin said, "he wrote it." She said, "He had been practicing my handwriting for 2 months. I found a notebook in his briefcase one night. There were pages and pages of him copying my signature, of him copying my Christmas card letters, of him copying the way I write your name," Roisin said. "He never got the M right. He could never figure out the M." Maeve put her hands over her face. Because she had known. She had known the night she read the note. She had stood on the porch in the cold, and she had looked at the M, and she had known something was wrong with it, and she had not let herself believe it, because if she had let herself believe it, she would have had to do something, and she did not have the strength that night to do anything except walk 11 blocks to Helena's diner, Roisin said. He had been planning it for weeks. "I came home that night from the late shift at the office. He told me he was taking me to dinner. We went out. He kept me at the restaurant until almost midnight. When we got home, your box was already on the porch. The note was on the door. And he turned to me and he said, 'I have made a decision. The girl is gone. You will not call her. You will not look for her. If you contact her, I will leave you, and you will be alone again like you were after Finian died.'" Roisin's voice did not shake. It was very flat, the way the voice of a person sounds when they have rehearsed the words 1,000 times, in their head, in the dark, at 3 in the morning. "For months," she said, "I have been afraid of being alone since your father died. I have been afraid of it, the way some people are afraid of fire. I lost him, and the fear of losing anything else after him was a fear I could not look at. So I stopped looking. At everything," she said. "Including you," she said. "I knew you were at Helena's. I drove past the diner twice in March, once in April. I sat in the parking lot. I looked at the upstairs window. I did not go in, because if I went in, Russell would have known, and I would have had to choose," she said. "I did not choose. Maeve, that was the thing. I did not choose. I let him choose for me." Roisin finally looked at her daughter. Her eyes were not crying, but the area around them was raw, like she had been holding the tears in for so long that the skin was tired. She said, "I am not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I am not asking you to come home," she said. "I am asking you to know," she said, "that I did not write that note," she said, "that you were not thrown out by your mother," she said, "you were thrown out by a man," she said, "and I was too small to stop him." She paused. She said, "I am leaving him next week. I have a friend in Wilkes-Barre. I have $11,000 in the coffee can. I will not bother you again after this. I just needed you to know." She stopped. She waited. Maeve did not say anything for a long time. She looked out across the platform, at the empty rail bed, at the trees on the other side. She thought. She did not write the note. She thought. She did not throw me out. She thought. All this time, I have been carrying a stone that did not belong to me, she thought. And now she is taking it back. She did not feel relief. She did not feel anger. She felt the kind of tired that you feel when a long fever finally breaks. She said, "Mom," Roisin said. "Yes," Maeve said. "Do you remember? The way you used to write my name," Roisin said. "Yes," Maeve said. "The little curl, the fish hook," Roisin said. "The M reaching down. To hold the rest of the word," Maeve said. "Yes." "That one," Roisin said. "I still write it that way. When I write your name. In my journal. Every night," Maeve said. "You write my name every night," Roisin said. "Every night for 2 years and 4 months." Maeve closed her eyes. She said, "Okay," Roisin said. "Okay," Maeve said. "Okay." "I believe you," Roisin said. "Maeve." "I am not asking," Maeve said. "I know. You're not asking for forgiveness. I'm not giving it. Not today. Maybe not for a long time. But," she said, "but I believe you about the note. And I am glad you are leaving him. And I am glad you came," Roisin said. "Can I?" Maeve said. "What?" Roisin said. "Can I just sit here for a minute with you before I go?" Maeve said, "Yes." They sat. The wind came down off the ridge. The platform creaked under them. The watch ticked against Maeve's collarbone. Roisin reached over, slowly, like she was afraid the bench would break. She put her hand on Maeve's hand. Maeve did not pull away. She did not squeeze back. She just let the hand be there. That was as much as she could give. It was more than either of them had had in a long time. After 10 minutes, Roisin stood up. She walked back to the rental car. She turned. She said, "Maeve." Maeve said, "Yes." Roisin said, "Your father would have loved this place." Maeve said, "I know." Roisin got in the car. She drove away. The dust settled on the access road. Maeve sat on the platform until the dust was completely gone, and then she stood up. She walked into the ticket booth. She picked up Silas's Hamilton watch. She held it in her hand. She said, out loud, to the empty room. She did not write the note. The depot did not answer, but the silence was the warm kind of silence, the kind that listens back. Ted Ashworth came to the depot a week later. He was driving the station wagon. He had a cardboard banker's box on the passenger seat. He carried the box up onto the platform with both hands, like the box was heavy with something more than paper. He set it down on the platform bench. He said, "Maeve, I need you to sit down," Maeve said. "Ted." "What?" Ted said. "Just sit down." She sat. He opened the box. He pulled out a small leather-bound book. The book was old, soft, the corners worn round. Ted said, I drove to the Bedford Railroad Historical Society on Tuesday. I had a hunch about the original station agents on the Bedford branch, about what kinds of records they kept. He said, "The Society has an archive in the basement of the old freight house in Bedford. I have been a member for 30 years, and I have never been down there. The archivist is a woman named Phyllis Rourke. She is 81. She has been the volunteer archivist since 1979. He said, "I asked her if there was anything in the archive related to Silas Whitcomb. She said, 'Theodore Ashworth. Why have you waited so long to ask?'" He paused. He said, "She pulled this book down from a shelf. She said, 'This was donated to the Society in 1971 by a woman named Margaret Whitcomb, 3 months before she died.' Margaret was Silas's sister." Ted handed the book to Maeve. He said, "It is the diary of Elspeth Whitcomb." Maeve took it. The leather was cool in her hand. The book smelled like an old library, like the smell of paper that has been waiting in the dark for a long time. Ted said, "Margaret kept it after Elspeth died. Then Margaret kept it after Silas died. Then Margaret donated it to the Society when she knew she was dying. She wrote a note in the front. The note says, quote, 'To be kept safe until someone comes asking,' end quote." He looked at Maeve. He said, "Phyllis told me. Theodore, in 54 years, you are the first person who has come asking." Maeve opened the diary. The pages were thin. The ink was brown. The handwriting was a careful slant, like Silas's, but softer, more rounded, the hand of a woman who had liked to write. Maeve turned the pages slowly. Most of the entries were short. "Made bread today. The wind is from the north. Silas is at the depot. The trains are late again. Walked to the spring with Margaret. The lilacs are out. Cooked a chicken for the Ladies' Aid." She kept turning. She did not know what she was looking for, until she did. The first entry that caught her eye was dated July 12, 1948. It said, "A new brakeman has been coming through this summer on the early freights from Bedford. A young man, Irish. He cannot be more than 20. He has the bluest eyes I have ever seen on a person. Silas says he is going to be a good railroader. He has the patience. He has the hands. I gave him a slice of pound cake yesterday. He took it like a boy who has not had cake in a long time. He said his name very softly. Cormac. He has a brother who works in the coal patch. He is the youngest of 7. I think he is lonely." Maeve stopped turning pages. She thought. 1948. She thought. "My grandfather was 19 years old." She thought. "His first summer on the railroad." She thought. "He came through Sparrow's Bend before they sent him on permanent assignment." She thought. "Elspeth gave him pound cake." She kept reading. There were more entries about Cormac through that summer, brief ones. Cormac was on the freight again. He laughed today. First time. The boy has a beautiful laugh. And I sent Cormac home with apples. He gave Silas a small bird he had carved from scrap pine. Silas put it on the desk in the booth. Then, in late August, 1948, Cormac's name stopped appearing. The next entries were ordinary. Bread, lilacs, Ladies' Aid, the weather. Maeve kept turning. She kept turning. She kept turning. Until she came to the entry dated March 14, 1949. 2 weeks before Elspeth died. The handwriting on this page was a little less steady, like the fever had already started. The pen had wobbled in places. It said, "I had the dream again last night. This is the 3rd time. I want to write it down before I forget it. Silas thinks I should not write about the dreams. He thinks they trouble me. But he is wrong. They do not trouble me. They comfort me. Because I think they are true. In the dream. I am standing in the waiting room of our depot. It is very cold. There is snow on the platform. The bay window is dark. The trains have stopped coming. Silas is not there. The waiting room is empty. And then she comes in. A young woman, 20, maybe 21. She has cold hands and stubborn eyes. She is wearing a heavy dark coat. The coat is a man's coat. It is too big for her. The shoulders are too wide. She has it buttoned all the way up. She has a silver pocket watch on a leather cord around her neck. The watch is on a Hamilton case. I can see the maker's mark in the dream. I know the maker's mark because Silas has one just like it. She does not see me. She walks past me. She goes into the ticket booth. She sits on the stool. She looks out the bay window at the empty rail bed. And then she does what I knew she would do. She lifts up the floorboards, and I see her face for the first time. This time, I see her face. And, Silas, I have to tell you something. When you read this, because I am writing this for Silas to read, because I am too tired to say it aloud tonight. Silas. She has the eyes of someone we already love. She has the eyes of the Irish brakeman, the boy, the young one, the one we fed pound cake last summer, the one who carved the wooden bird. She has Cormac's eyes. I do not know how. I do not know when. I do not know what year it will be. But she is his. She is coming from him. Maybe not his daughter. Maybe his daughter's daughter. Maybe further still. But she is his. And when she comes, you must leave her everything, because she is coming for what we have, and she is coming for what we are, and she is coming because we have been waiting for her without knowing it. I have to sleep now. The fever is bad. I will tell you in the morning. The page ended. The next page was dated March 16th. The handwriting was Silas's. It said, Elspeth died in the morning. I am writing in her diary because I do not know where else to put what I am feeling. She told me about the dream before she went. I have written down everything she said. I do not understand it, but I will keep the depot, and I will wait. The Irish boy is somewhere on the line. I will watch for him. That was all. Maeve closed the diary. She closed her eyes. She held the diary against her chest. She did not breathe for a long moment. Ted Ashworth was sitting on the bench beside her. He had been watching her face the entire time she read. He did not say anything. He just waited. When Maeve opened her eyes, she looked at him. She said, Ted. Ted said, Yes. She said, Elspeth saw me. Ted said, Yes. She said, Before I was born. She saw me. Ted said, Yes. She said, Because of my grandfather. Ted said, Because of your grandfather. She said, She saw his eyes in my face. Ted said, That's what she wrote. Maeve looked out across the platform. The afternoon light was slanting through the bay window of the booth, onto the cream-colored wall, the wall Helena had helped her paint. She thought, A woman who died in 1949 dreamed me. She thought, because she met my grandfather when he was 19 years old. She thought, and she gave him pound cake. She thought, and she remembered his eyes. She thought, and she knew, somehow, that his eyes would come back, in someone else. Maeve put the diary down on the bench. She walked to the edge of the platform. She looked at the long, empty rail bed running away into the trees. She said, to Ted, without turning, Why? Ted said, Why what? She said, Why me? Why now? Why this place? Ted was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Maeve, I am 68 years old. I have spent my whole life around railroads, and I will tell you something I have never told another person. Because I was embarrassed, he said. Some places are listening, most places aren't, but some are. And those places, they remember the people who were kind to them, and when those people need to be honored, the place finds a way, he said. Silas was kind to this depot for 26 years. He swept the platform. He made coffee for the brakemen. He carried a flag for his wife's dead brother. He left a note for whoever would come next, he said. Elspeth was kind to a 19-year-old Irish boy on a hot summer afternoon in 1948. She gave him pound cake. She remembered his eyes, he said. The depot remembered, and when your grandfather needed a place to send his granddaughter, the depot opened its door, he said. That is what I think, he said. You can call it a dream. You can call it a coincidence. You can call it anything you want. But I am 68 years old, and I have stopped needing to call things anything but what they are. Maeve turned. She looked at Ted. She said, "Thank you." Ted said, "Don't thank me. Thank Phyllis Rourke. She was the one who kept the book on the shelf." He stood up. He said, "I'll be back Tuesday. I'm bringing a switch lantern that needs new glass. You can help me with it." He walked to his station wagon. He drove away. Maeve carried the diary into the ticket booth. She set it on the agent's desk, next to the Hamilton watch. She sat on the stool. She thought about the silver dollars, the 11 silver dollars in the leather pouch. She had not looked at them carefully. She had unwrapped one, the Morgan dollar from 1921. She had counted them. She had wrapped them back up. She had not looked at all of them. She pulled the pouch from a small wooden drawer in the desk. She loosened the drawstring. She poured the 11 coins onto the desk, on a clean, folded cloth. She unwrapped them, one by one. Morgan, peace. Morgan, peace. Morgan, Morgan, peace, peace. She held each one up to the light. She checked the edges, the faces, the dates. Most were ordinary, but the 9th coin, a peace dollar, 1923, had something on the edge, small, scratched, not stamped. She held it up under the desk lamp, engraved into the milled edge, so small you had to know to look for it, in tiny capital letters. CD, 1953. Maeve stopped breathing. She thought. CD. She thought. Cormac Donnelly. She thought. 1953. She thought. Wait. She thought. Wait. 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 She set the coin down on the desk. She picked up Silas's letter. The second one. The private one. The one to the girl who will come. She read it again. The line. The one Silas had written. About Elspeth. She has the eyes of someone we already love. Maeve picked the coin back up. She turned it in her fingers. CD, 1953, she thought. Silas kept a silver dollar with my grandfather's initials, she thought. For decades. She thought. Until he wrote that letter. Until he buried the lockbox. She thought. He kept it. Because he loved my grandfather. She thought. Not romantic love. Not that kind. The other kind. She thought. The kind that comes from one cold morning. And another. And another. And a young Irish boy who shows up at 5 every morning at a lonely junction in the Allegheny foothills. And the older man and his wife who hand him a cup of coffee and a slice of pound cake. And a kind word. She thought. That kind of love. She thought. The kind we don't have a word for in English anymore. She set the coin in the center of the desk, beside the Hamilton watch. She put the diary beside both of them. She put the 2 letters beside the diary. She sat back on the stool. She looked at all of it. She thought, my grandfather kept a watch with Silas's initials in it for decades. He never told me what they meant. He never said the name Silas in front of me. He never said the name Sparrow's Bend in front of me. He kept Silas's name inside the watch, like a private prayer. She thought. And Silas, 67 years ago, kept my grandfather's name on the edge of a silver dollar, in a leather pouch, in a lockbox, under a floor. She thought. 2 old men, 2 engravings, 2 private prayers, she thought. They were never going to see each other again. They knew that. They knew it in 1958 when the line shut down. They had said goodbye. They had shaken hands on the platform. She thought. And they both did this, independently, without telling each other. She thought. Because they loved each other, quietly, in the way men of that generation loved each other, through coffee and silence. She thought. And the universe heard them. She put her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. She had cried enough this season, but her shoulders shook a little, and the Hamilton watch ticked, and the silver dollar sat on the desk, and the diary lay open beside it, and outside the bay window, the summer light was the kind of gold that only happens in August in Pennsylvania, when everything is still green, but the green has been going green for so long that it has gone deep. The depot was warm. The depot was full. The depot was no longer waiting. The summer ran, long and slow. Hikers found the depot. Birdwatchers found the depot. Railroad enthusiasts from as far as Erie and Cleveland found the depot. Maeve served coffee. She did not charge. She kept a tin on the bench. People left what they wanted to leave: a jar of honey, a loaf of bread, a handful of wildflowers, a folded $20 bill in an envelope with the words, "Thank you for keeping it open." Beatrice came every Wednesday. Gus Brennan built a new bench for the platform out of reclaimed white oak from a barn in the next valley over. He did not let Maeve pay him. He said, "I am eating your apples in payment." Ted Ashworth brought 10 more things from his attic: a timetable from 1947, a brass spittoon cleaned, a Pennsylvania Railroad calendar from 1953 with the month of June circled in pencil. Helena drove down once a month. She slept on the cot in the freight room. She made pierogi on the kerosene stove, and she fed everyone in the township who came by. And one Sunday in late September, Helena brought Roisin. She had called Maeve a week ahead. She had said, "Maeve, your mother is in Wilkes Barre. She is in a 1-bedroom apartment over a hardware store. She is working at a bookstore part-time. She is taking a class at the community college. She asked me. She did not assume. She asked if she might come to the depot with me for one afternoon." Helena had paused. She had said, "I told her I would ask you, so I am asking." Maeve had said, "Yes." That was the whole reply. Yes. Roisin came that Sunday. She brought a small package wrapped in brown paper. She did not bring Russell. She would never bring Russell again. She walked up onto the platform. She sat on Gus's white oak bench. She handed Maeve the package. Maeve unwrapped it. Inside was a small framed photograph she had never seen. It was Cormac Donnelly, young, around 20, standing on the platform of Sparrow's Bend Junction, in a Pennsylvania Railroad brakeman's uniform, smiling, a coffee mug in one hand. Standing next to him was an older man, around 50, in a station agent suit, holding a clipboard, smiling too. Beside the older man stood a woman, a little younger, soft features, dark hair pulled back. She was holding a small wooden bird in her palm. The three of them, standing on this platform. On the back of the photo, in Cormac's slanted hand, me with Mr. and Mrs. Whitcomb. Sparrow's Bend Junction, summer 1948. The kindest people I ever met. Maeve looked up at her mother. She said, "Where did you find this?" Roisin said. "In the row house. After Russell, I went back to clean it out. He had taken everything of value, but he had left a shoebox in the back of the basement. He thought it was nothing," she said. "It was your grandfather's." Maeve held the photograph in both hands. She looked at Cormac's face, 19 years old, almost a boy. She looked at Silas's face, smiling. She looked at Elspeth's face, the woman who had dreamed her. She looked at the small wooden bird in Elspeth's hand. She said, "Mom," Roisin said. "Yes," Maeve said. "Thank you," Roisin said. Maeve said. "Yes," Roisin said. "I am not asking to come back to your life. I am just glad you let me see this place." "Once," Maeve said. "You can come again," Roisin said. "Really," Maeve said. "Sometimes. When I invite you. Not yet often, but sometimes." Roisin nodded. She did not push. She had learned. In her one-bedroom apartment in Wilkes-Barre, with her bookstore job and her community college class, to stop pushing for things she had not earned yet. She had been earning them. Slowly. She would keep earning them. The way a thing is earned when it has been broken. By patience. By work. By time. And in some long future. Not this year. Maybe not next. Maeve might one day write Mom with a little curl on the M of her own name. But not yet. Today was just today. Today was a photograph from 1948. That was enough. October came. The leaves on the ridge turned the colors that the Allegheny foothills do in October. Yellow, orange, russet, old gold. The light got long. Maeve put a hand-painted wooden sign on the platform. Ted Ashworth had painted it. It said, "Sparrow's Bend Coffee. No charge. Sit a while." She hung white lights along the eaves the way Beatrice had suggested. She started a small notebook, a guest book. People signed their names. A woman named Phyllis Rourke, 81, drove out from Bedford one Saturday to meet the young woman who had finally come asking. She drank coffee on the platform for 2 hours. She did not say much, but before she left, she put her hand on Maeve's cheek, and she said, "Child, I have been a librarian and an archivist for 60 years. I have spent my whole life keeping things on shelves for people who had not yet come to ask. Today is the best day I have ever had at work." Then she got back in her car, and she drove away, on a clear evening in late October. Maeve sat on Gus's white oak bench, with her grandfather's silver pocket watch in her right hand, and Silas's Hamilton in her left. The sun was setting behind the western ridge. The light was the kind of gold you only get in the last hour of an October day in Pennsylvania. She held the two watches side by side. She lifted them up, into the gold. Both read exactly the same time, accurate to the second, set to railroad time, the way they had been carried, by men who had spent their lives believing that knowing the time was a kind of duty to the people who depended on you to be where you said you would be, when you said you would be there. She thought about her grandfather Cormac, who had ridden cabooses through every kind of Pennsylvania weather for 32 years, and had never once been late to work. She thought about her father Finian, who had walked out of an insurance office because the coat had felt like somebody else's, and had gone back to the only kind of work that had ever felt like his. She thought about Silas Whitcomb, who had served coffee at 5 o'clock every morning. To brakemen, he was not required to serve, and had hidden a lockbox under the floor of his ticket booth on his last day at the junction in 1958 because he had believed that small kindness was a kind of patience, and that patience always finds the person it has been waiting for. She thought about Elspeth Whitcomb, who had given pound cake to a 19-year-old Irish brakeman on a summer afternoon in 1948, and had dreamed of his granddaughter 2 weeks before she died, and had told her husband to wait. She thought about her mother Roisin, who had been emptied out by grief, and had let a man fill the room with cold, and was now living in a one-bedroom apartment over a hardware store in Wilkes Barre, and was earning her way back. She thought about Helena Wojcik, and Beatrice Kettering, and Gus Brennan, and Ted Ashworth, and Phyllis Rourke. She thought about how strangers had been kind to her, for no reason, or for the oldest reason there is, which is this, that somebody, once, long ago, had been kind to them. She thought about a station agent and his wife who had pressed a silver dollar into a lock box, with a young brakeman's initials scratched on the edge, and a young brakeman who had carried a Hamilton watch with the older man's initials engraved inside the case, for decades, without ever telling his granddaughter what the letters meant. She thought about how love can hide, in 2 engravings, on 2 pieces of silver, for 70-some years, and then, when the universe is good and ready, how it can find its way home. She stood up, the watches in both hands. She walked into the ticket booth. She set Silas's Hamilton back on the agent's desk. She closed the case. Carefully. She kept her grandfather's around her neck. She walked back out onto the platform. The sun was almost gone. The last gold light was on the green sign above the bay window. Sparrow's Bend, JCT, Penn RR. Maeve put her hand on the wooden post of the platform railing. She said, aloud, to the depot, to the evening, to whoever might be listening, "Thank you." A small wind moved down the railbed. It rustled the leaves at the edge of the clearing. The wind did not answer. But the silence was the warm kind of silence, the kind that listens back. Maeve Donnelly was 20 years old. She had once been homeless. She had once stood on a porch in February with a cardboard box and a note that was not in her mother's handwriting. She had once walked 11 blocks to a diner where a 62-year-old Polish-American woman had turned the open sign to closed and had poured her a mug of coffee and had said, "Tell me." She had once spent $10 on a building. It had been the best $10 anyone had ever spent. A small station does not stop being a station just because the trains have stopped coming. It keeps the schedule in its bones. It keeps the coffee in its kettle. It keeps the lockbox under the floor of the booth, and the flag folded in its triangular fold, and the silver pocket watch wound on the desk. All the small, honest things that the last person who loved the building set down before they turned the key in the door. A small station waits. It has always waited. That is what a station is. And when the next person walks down the railbed in the cold, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, and $10, and a watch on a leather cord, the station does not need to speak, because stations do not speak. It only needs to show her. The loose floorboards beneath the stool. Silas and Elspeth Whitcomb had been waiting for Maeve Donnelly, without knowing her name, for longer than she had been alive. Cormac had been waiting for her in the shape of a silver pocket watch. Finian had been waiting for her in the smell of diesel and the names of freight cars. Helena had been waiting for her in the back booth of a diner with a fresh pot of coffee. Beatrice and Gus and Ted and Phyllis had been waiting for her too, each in their own quiet Pennsylvania way, for the young woman who would walk 4 miles down a county road in the cold and sign her name in her grandfather's slanted hand, for $10. It was the best $10 she ever spent. The sun went down. The watch ticked against her collarbone. The depot stood patient, and lit, and alive, and ready for whoever would come next, because that is what a small station does. It waits. And then, when the right person finally arrives, it welcomes them home.